The morning before finals. Celeste Marlowe grabbed my wrist in the empty east stairwell and bent it until I heard the crack. Pain shot up my arm so fast the world went white. She smiled when I fell to my knees. "Oops," she said softly. "How careless of you. Nora. You really should watch your step before the most important exam of your life." Behind her, my childhood friend Adrian stood frozen. He had seen everything. The shove. The twist. The way Celeste's fingers tightened around my wrist even after I gasped for her to stop. But when I looked at him through the blur of tears, he only said, "Nora. Don't make this bigger than it is." In my last life. I screamed. I reported her. I begged the school to check the hallway. Celeste cried first. She said I had attacked her out of jealousy because Adrian liked her. Adrian said. I didn't see clearly. The school believed her. My dominant wrist was fractured. I missed finals. I lost my medical scholarship. My mother sold her wedding ring to pay my hospital bill. Celeste graduated with honors. Adrian sent me one message 2 months later. "I hope one day you stop blaming everyone else." I died the next winter in a cheap clinic waiting room. Feverish. Exhausted. And still unable to fully close my right hand. But now I was reborn. Back to the morning before finals. Back to the east stairwell. Back to Celeste's hand around my wrist. This time, when she smiled and reached for me, I did not step back. I let her snap it because she did not know. Over the holidays, St. Aurelia Academy had installed new emergency security cameras in the east stairwell after a teacher was attacked there. The footage did not go to the school. It went directly to the district safety office. And because Celeste was already 18, what she called a little lesson would not end with detention. It would end with handcuffs. Chapter 1. When I opened my eyes, I was holding a pen. For one terrifying second, I thought I was still in the clinic trying to sign the consent form with fingers that would not obey me. Then I heard laughter. Bright. Careless. Cruel. I looked up. I was in classroom 3A. St. Aurelia Academy. Rows of polished desks. Tall windows. Final exam countdown written on the blackboard. 1 day left. My breath stopped. 1 day. Not 1 year. Not too late. 1 day before finals. 1 day before Celeste broke my wrist. The pen slipped from my fingers and hit the desk. Adrian, sitting 1 row ahead, turned around. Nora. His face was younger than I remembered. Still beautiful in the way that had once made me stupid. Dark hair. Clear eyes. The calm expression of someone who had always been forgiven before he even apologized. My childhood friend. My neighbor. The boy who taught me to ride a bike and carried my bag after my father left. The boy who promised. "We'll both enter Imperial Medical University. I won't let you go alone." The boy who stood in the stairwell and watched Celeste destroy my hand. I stared at him until his brows drew together. "You okay?" Before I could answer, a soft voice floated across the room. "Adrian. Can you help me with this question?" Celeste Marlowe sat by the window, waving a worksheet between 2 perfect fingers. Her blonde hair spilled over her shoulder. Her uniform was spotless. Her smile was sweet enough to make teachers forget she had teeth. Everyone called Celeste the Academy Rose. Beautiful. Rich. Untouchable. Only the scholarship students knew roses had thorns. Adrian looked at me for half a second longer. Then he turned away. "Sure. Celeste." Something inside me went quiet. In my last life, that small turn of his head would have hurt. This time, it explained everything. Celeste did not become powerful because she was strong. She became powerful because people looked away at exactly the right time. I lowered my gaze to my desk. My old final review notebook was open. Anatomy diagrams. Chemistry equations. Medical ethics summaries. 6 months of work. My entire future compressed into blue ink. Imperial Medical University offered only 3 full scholarships in our region. I was ranked first. Celeste was second. She had money. Connections. Private tutors. I had 1 chance. That was why she broke my wrist. Not because she lost control. Not because I provoked her. Because if I could not write, I could not sit finals. If I could not sit finals, her ranking rose. In my last life, I thought cruelty needed anger. Now I knew better. Sometimes cruelty wore perfume and calculated quietly. The bell rang. Students stood. Stretching. Laughing. Making final plans. Celeste walked toward my desk with Adrian beside her. Nora, she said, smiling. You look pale. I closed my notebook. Feeny. Her eyes flicked to my hand. My right hand. The hand she would break tomorrow. I heard scholarship interviews are after final ranking. She said. You must be nervous. Not really. Her smile tightened. Adrian frowned slightly. Don't overwork yourself. He said. You've been tense lately. In my last life. I would have softened at his concern. Now I heard the accusation. Hiding under it. Tense meant difficult. Difficult meant unreliable. Unreliable meant easy to doubt later. Celeste sighed delicately. I wish I had Nora's confidence. Some of us actually panic before exams. A few classmates laughed. Adrian looked at her gently. You'll do fine. I stood. I need to go. Celeste stepped aside. But not enough. Her shoulder brushed mine. A light touch. A warning. She leaned close and whispered. So quietly only I could hear. Enjoy writing while you still can. My fingers went cold. She remembered nothing from the future. But her plan was already alive. I looked at her beautiful face and smiled. I will. For the first time. Uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Good. Let her wonder. Chapter 2. After school. I went straight to the district safety office. Not the headmaster. Not the school counselor. Not Adrian. In my last life. I had gone to people who cared more about reputation than truth. This time. I went to the place where footage could not be edited by Celeste's father. The receptionist looked up when I entered. Yes. My name is Nora Lynn. I'm a student at St. Aurelia Academy. I want to ask whether the east stairwell emergency cameras are active. Her expression sharpened. Why? I took a breath. Because I believe someone is planning to hurt me there tomorrow. The word sounded insane. But I had learned something from dying once. People dismiss panic. They file reports about risk. The receptionist called a safety officer named Mr. Hale. He had gray hair, tired eyes, and the expression of a man who had heard too many excuses from rich schools. He listened without interrupting. I did not say I was reborn. I did not say Celeste had already broken my wrist once. I said Celeste had threatened me. I said she had a history of cornering scholarship students. I said finals ranking gave her motive. Then I showed him the message Nari had sent me in my last life and I had saved in cloud storage without knowing it would follow me back. Except now. The message had arrived again that afternoon. Nora. Avoid the east stairwell tomorrow. Celeste was laughing with Mia about making sure your hand gets some rest. Nari was blunt. Suspicious. And allergic to drama unless it came with evidence. Mr. Hale read it twice. The cameras are active. He said. They feed directly to us because the stairwell was flagged as a blind spot last term. My throat tightened. In my last life. I discovered that too late. This time. Hearing it before the fall felt like someone opening a window in a burning room. Can the school access or delete the footage? No. Can I request preservation if something happens? His gaze softened slightly. If something happens. We preserve it automatically. I nodded. He leaned forward. Miss Lynn. If you think you're in danger, don't go to that stairwell. For a moment. I almost laughed. That was the reasonable answer. Avoid the stairwell. Save the wrist. Take the exam. Win quietly. But I remembered last life. Celeste did not stop after the stairwell. She spread rumors. She tampered with my lab drawer. She had her friends accidentally spill water on my notes. And when I still ranked first. She chose violence. If I avoided tomorrow. She would simply choose another place. Another time. Another blind corner. And maybe then there would be no camera. I understand. I said. Mr. Hale gave me his card. If anything happens. Call emergency services first. Not the school. I took the card with both hands. Outside. Rain had started. I stood beneath the safety office awning and looked at my right wrist. It was still whole. Still mine. I flexed my fingers. In my last life. I spent months trying to do that without pain. A normal person would protect it. A smarter girl might run. But I was not normal anymore. I had already died because no one believed an injury that happened in the dark. This time. I would let the dark testify. Chapter 3. That night. Adrian came to my apartment. He brought soup. 1 bowl. In my last life. I thought the gesture was sweet. Now I knew he had stopped by Celeste's house first. She posted a photo of the same soup brand later with a caption. Some people always know when I'm stressed. I opened the door, but did not invite him in. Adrian looked surprised. Nora. What do you need? His eyes searched my face. I wanted to check on you. You've been strange. There it was again. Strange. Not hurt. Not quiet. Not careful. Strange. I leaned against the doorframe. I'm stuttering. He lifted the soup. You haven't eaten. I almost asked how he knew. Then remembered. In this life. I had not told him. Celeste had. She always knew how to borrow concern and spend it on herself. I'll eat later. His jaw tightened. Why are you shutting me out? The old Nora would have panicked. She would have said. I'm not. She would have apologized for needing space. She would have tried to make him comfortable after he made her lonely. I only said. Because you keep standing on the wrong side of the door. He frowned. What does that mean? I looked at him. Do you know why Celeste hates me? He sighed. Nora. Don't start. That answer was enough. I smiled faintly. You already decided I'm starting something. She doesn't hate you. You two are competitors. You always take it personally. In my last life. After my wrist snapped. He said almost the same thing. Celeste was scared. Too. Finals pressure makes people act badly. Badly. As if breaking a bone was the same as snapping at someone. I looked at the boy I used to love. Adrian. If Celeste hurt me. Would you believe me? He froze. For 1 second. The hallway was silent except for rain ticking against the window. Then he said. Why are you asking that? Answer. His grip tightened around the soup bag. I'd need to know what happened. You'd need proof. That's not unfair. No. It was not unfair in principle. But from him. It meant something else. It meant my word weighed less than her tears. I nodded. Good to know. He looked irritated now. You're impossible when you get like this. When I get like what? Cold. I almost smiled. People call winter cruel when it stops feeding the flowers. I have finals tomorrow. I said. Go home. His expression softened slightly. Nora. Wait. I closed the door. For a moment. He stood outside. Then I heard his footsteps fade. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against it. No tears came. Maybe I had used all of them in the last life. Maybe the body remembered even when the world reset. My phone buzzed. A message from Nari. She's planning something. I heard Mia say East Stairwell 720. Don't be stupid. I replied. Thank you. Nari answered immediately. That is not a promise. I looked at my right hand. Then typed. I know what I'm doing. She sent back. That's what stupid people say before doing stupid things. For the first time all day. I laughed softly. Then I packed my exam bag with my left hand on purpose. A habit I would need soon. Chapter for the morning before finals was bright and cold. Too beautiful for violence. Students moved through the academy courtyard carrying review sheets and coffee cups. Teachers reminded everyone to sleep early. The school banners fluttered blue and white above the gates. I arrived at 7:05. Nari waited near the lockers. Short black hair. Sharp eyes. Arms crossed. You look terrible. She said. Good morning to you. Too. Don't go to the east stairwell. I opened my locker. I need to get my spare calculator from the physics cabinet. Use the west stairs. West corridor is locked before 8 o'clock. She stared at me. You're lying. Yes. Her eyes narrowed. You're going anyway. I placed my books in my bag. Nari. If something happens. Call Mr. Hale. Not the school. Her expression changed. What did you do? Prepared. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. For a second. I thought she might physically block me. Then she stepped back. If you get yourself killed. I'll drag you back and kill you again. I smiled. I believe you. She did not smile back. At 7:18. I entered the east corridor. The school was quieter here. Older. Sunlight barely reached the narrow windows. The stairwell door stood at the end like a mouth. My heart began pounding. My body remembered. The pain had not happened yet. But my nerves were already screaming. I pushed open the stairwell door. Concrete steps. Metal railing. Dust in the corners. And above the second landing. A small black camera dome. Active. Watching. I walked down 3 steps. Then Celeste's voice floated from below. Nora. Going somewhere. I stopped. She stood on the landing beneath me with Mia and Elise. Her two favorite shadows. Celeste wore her uniform perfectly. White collar. Blue ribbon. Polished shoes. She looked like a student council poster. Only her eyes were wrong. What do you want? I asked. She smiled. Just to talk. Mia moved behind me. Elise leaned against the door, blocking both exits. In my last life. This was when fear swallowed me. This time. Fear came. But I did not let it steer. Celeste climbed one step. You've been acting confident lately. I have finals tomorrow. So do I. Yes. Her smile thinned. And yet everyone keeps saying you'll take first. I said nothing. She stepped closer. You know, Nora. Girls like you are so annoying. Always acting poor and hardworking like that makes you noble. Mia laughed. Celeste's gaze dropped to my right hand. All that scholarship hope in one little wrist. My stomach turned. Even knowing it was coming did not make it easy. I could still leave. I could still scream. I could still shove past them and save myself the pain. Then I remembered my mother selling her ring. Adrian looking away. Celeste walking across the graduation stage. My own fingers stiff in winter. No. This time. The truth needed more than a threat. It needed the act. Celeste reached for my arm. I did not dodge. Her fingers closed around my wrist. Cold. Tight. Nora. She whispered. After tomorrow. No one will remember how hard you tried. I looked directly at the camera above her shoulder. Then back at her. You're sure? Her eyes flickered. What? Nothing. I smiled. That was what enraged her. She twisted. Pain exploded white-hot through my arm. There was a crack. My knees hit the stair. For a second. I could not breathe. The world narrowed to bone. Fire. And the sound of my own gasp. Mea culpa. Elise whispered. Celeste. Celeste let go like my pain had burned her. Then. As planned. She stepped back and widened her eyes. Nora. Why did you lunge at me? The door above opened. Adrian stood there. Of course. He was always nearby when Celeste needed a witness. His face went pale. Nora. I cradled my wrist against my chest. Tears blurred my vision. Not fake. Not controlled. Real pain. Celeste began crying instantly. She grabbed me. I only pushed her away. I didn't mean Adrian rushed down. For one foolish second. I thought he was coming to me. He stopped between us. Between us. Not beside me. Nora. He said. Voice shaking. What happened? I looked at him through tears. The boy from my last life. The boy from this life. Always asking too late. I whispered. Call the district safety office. Celeste froze. Adrian frowned. What? I lifted my eyes to the black dome above us. The camera saw everything. The stairwell went silent. Celeste stopped crying. Chapter 5. The police arrived before the headmaster. That was the first sign Celeste understood something had gone terribly wrong. In my last life. The school nurse wrapped my wrist while the dean called it an unfortunate student conflict. This time. Paramedics stabilized my arm while two district officers reviewed the lip-preserved footage on a tablet. Celeste stood near the wall. Pale and shaking. Mia and Elise would not look at her. Adrian sat on the steps. Both hands in his hair. The headmaster arrived sweating. This is an internal academy matter. He said. The district officer looked at him coldly. Not when assault causing bodily harm is recorded on a district-monitored emergency camera. The headmaster shut his mouth. I almost laughed. Pain made it impossible. They took me to the hospital. Nari rode with me in the ambulance because she shouted at 3 adults until they gave up. She sat beside the stretcher. Arms crossed. You are the stupidest smart person I know. I stared at the ceiling. Breathing through the pain. Did it work? She looked furious. Then her face softened. Yes. I closed my eyes. At the hospital. The doctor confirmed a fracture. Not as severe as in my last life. Maybe because I knew how to fall. Maybe because the body remembered how to protect itself. Still. Finals were tomorrow. My writing hand was useless. The old panic rose. Then the district officer entered with a woman from the examination board. Ms. Lin. The woman said. Given that the injury was caused by a recorded criminal assault immediately before finals. You qualify for protected examination accommodations. I blinked. What? You may sit the exams with a certified scribe. Additional time. Or oral response format where applicable. Your eligibility is preserved. For a moment, I could not speak. In my last life, no one told me that because the school never classified it as assault because Celeste's father pressured them because Adrian didn't see clearly. The exam board woman placed a form beside my bed. You still have the right to compete. The right. Such a small phrase. Such an enormous thing. Nari looked away. Her eyes were red. I signed the form with my left hand. Messy. Slow. Minnie. That evening, Adrian came to the hospital. Nari was getting coffee. My wrist was wrapped and elevated. Painkillers made the room feel soft at the edges. He stood in the doorway. Face white. Nora. I looked at him. He took a step in. I saw the footage. Of course. He had. Everyone had. Probably. District evidence moved to police. Police contacted school. School whispered. Students posted. Truth. Once preserved. Traveled faster than lies. Adrian's voice broke. She did it. I said nothing. His eyes filled. I'm sorry. In my last life, I dreamed of him saying that. I imagined I would cry. Forgive him. And everything would return to the way it was before Celeste. Now. The words only sat between us. Too small to cover the damage. You were there. I said. He flinched. I froze. No. You doubted. His face twisted. Nora. I didn't know. You saw my wrist in her hand. He closed his eyes. I know. You heard the crack. His shoulders shook. I know. And your first question was what happened. The silence after that was answer enough. He moved closer. I wanted to believe it wasn't that bad. I laughed softly. Painfully. Because if it was that bad, you would have to do something. He looked at me then. Really looked. And maybe for the first time, he understood that cowardice was not always running away. Sometimes cowardice was standing still and calling it fairness. I'll testify. He whispered. Good. Hope flickered across his face. Not romantic hope. The desperate hope of someone who wanted one correct action to erase 1,000 wrong silences. I closed my eyes. Now leave. His breath caught. Nora. I have finals tomorrow. He stood there another moment. Then left. This time. I did not watch him go. Chapter 6. I sat finals with my arm in a sling and a scribe beside me. The exam hall was full. Everyone knew. No one said anything. Celeste's seat was empty. Mia and Elise sat apart. Faces pale. Adrian was 2 rows ahead. He turned once before the exam began. Then looked away when I did not meet his eyes. The chief invigilator read the accommodation rules. My scribe. A quiet graduate student named Helen. Sat ready with a pen. Whenever you're ready. She whispered. I looked at the paper. For one moment. Fear returned. What if I could not think through the pain? What if speaking answers was slower? What if Celeste still won by damaging what she could not take? Then I flexed the fingers of my left hand. Alive. Verified. Still here. I began. Question 1. The brachial plexus. Helen wrote. I spoke. The room faded. There was only the exam. My mind. And the future trying to remain mine. Paper after paper. I continued. Anatomy. Chemistry. Ethics. Clinical reasoning. By the final exam. My throat was raw from dictating. My wrists robbed. And my body shook with exhaustion. But. I finished. When Helen closed the last answer booklet. She smiled. You did well. Those words almost undid me. Not because I knew my score. Because someone had seen me fight and did not call it drama. The results came 1 week later. First rank. Nora Lynn. Full scholarship to Imperial Medical University. Second place was empty pending investigation. Celeste's name had been removed. The school forum erupted. Did Nora take first with a broken wrist? Celeste is finished. There's police footage. I heard she might go to prison. Her dad can't bury it because district cameras caught it. 3 days after results. Celeste was formally charged because she was 18. Because the injury was intentional. Because the assault was premeditated and linked to exam sabotage. Because Mia, terrified of being charged. 2. Testified that Celeste had planned to wrest Nora's hand before finals. The plea deal came later. Juvenile leniency did not apply. Money softened the sentence. But it did not erase it. 6 months in a correctional facility. Community restrictions. No medical track eligibility. Prison. The headlines called it. Celeste Marlowe. Academy Rose. Walked into court wearing a white blouse and no makeup. Reporters shouted questions. Her father shielded his face. Her mother cried. Celeste looked smaller than I expected. Not innocent. Just small. Like cruelty had been a costume that no longer fit. I watched the hearing from the back row with Nari beside me. Celeste saw me once. Her eyes filled with hatred. Then fear. Then something almost like disbelief. As if she still could not understand how one broken wrist had become her own cage. The judge spoke. The gavel fell. And just like that, the girl who thought consequences were for poorer people was led away. I felt no joy. Only relief so deep it hurt. Chapter 7. Adrian came to see me after the sentencing. I was sitting outside the courthouse. My sling resting against my lap. Nari had gone to buy coffee and threaten a reporter who got too close. Adrian approached slowly. He looked thinner. Less polished. Regret had a way of stripping beauty down to bone. Nora. I did not answer. He sat on the bench, leaving space between us. For once, he did not assume closeness. I testified. He said. I know. I told them I saw her grab you. Yes. His hands clasped together. I should have said it immediately. Yes. He winced. I don't know how to apologize for that. You can't. The honesty hit him hard. But I was tired of softening truths for people who had never softened my fall. He looked toward the courthouse steps. I used to think being fair meant not choosing sides until I knew everything. I said nothing. But that was a lie. I chose every time I stayed silent. For the first time, I looked at him. That sentence was late. But it was true. He swallowed. I chose Celeste's tears because they were easier than your anger. I chose not to see how much pressure you were under because if I saw it, I'd have to help carry it. In my last life, I would have forgiven him there. The apology was good. Beautiful even. But the girl who needed it had died. I loved you. He said quietly. I looked at the courthouse doors. I know. His breath trembled. Did you love me? Yes. He closed his eyes. The word hurt him because it came without warmth. I continued. But I loved the version of you who only existed when things were easy. He opened his eyes. What now? Is there any way back? I thought of the east stairwell. Of his frozen face. Of my wrist in Celeste's hand. Of waking in a clinic in another life. Still waiting for him to believe me. No. He nodded slowly. A tear slipped down his face. He wiped it quickly. Ashamed. I hope your hand heals. It will. And Imperial Medical. I start in autumn. A small smile broke through his pain. You did it. I looked at my wrapped wrist. No. I said. I'm doing it because survival was not a single victory. It was repetition. Rehab exercises. Pain management. Scholarship paperwork. Learning to hold a scalpel someday without flinching. Adrian stood. I won't bother you again. Goodbye. Adrian. He flinched at the finality. Then bowed his head. And walked away. Nari returned with coffee. She watched his retreating back. Did he confess his tragic regrets? Yes. Did you throw coffee at him? You had the coffee. A missed opportunity. I laughed. It hurt my wrist somehow. It was worth it. Chapter 8. Rehabilitation. Was harder than finals. No one claps when you learn to bend a finger. No one posts rankings when you manage to grip a cup without shaking. The doctor said I was lucky. The fracture was clean. The nerves were intact. With therapy, I could regain full function. Lucky. I almost hated the word. But maybe luck was not the absence of damage. Maybe luck was evidence arriving before the world could call damage imaginary. Every morning, I did exercises. Open. Close. Stretch. Hold. Release. At first, pain flashed through my wrist like lightning. Then slowly, it became a dull ache. Then stiffness. Then memory. Imperial Medical University sent my admission package in July. Full scholarship. Research track. Clinical mentorship. I held the letter in both hands. Both. My mother cried when she saw that. Not loud crying. Quiet hand over mouth crying. In my last life. She cried because I lost everything. This time, She cried because I kept it. I'm proud of you, she said. I leaned into her arms carefully. For a moment. I was just her daughter. Not a witness. Not a victim. Not the girl from the stairwell. Just Nora. A week before I left for university. A letter arrived. No return address. I knew who it was from before I opened it. Celeste's handwriting was elegant even on cheap paper. Nora. I hated you because you made effort look clean. I had tutors. Money. My father's name. And I still felt like I was chasing you. I wanted to scare you. I wanted you to lose. I told myself it was just your wrist. Just one exam. Just one ranking. I know now that just was the word I used whenever I wanted to make my cruelty smaller. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted to say I remember the moment you looked at the camera. I think that was when I realized you weren't afraid of me anymore. Celeste. I read it once. Then again. I did not cry. I did not forgive her. But I kept the letter. Not because she deserved a place in my life. Because it proved she finally had to write the truth with her own hand. Imperial Medical University was enormous. White stone buildings. Glass laboratories. A teaching hospital connected by a covered bridge. On orientation day, I stood beneath the main arch and flexed my right hand. Still stiff. Still healing. Still mine. A student beside me noticed the support brace. Are you okay? I looked at her. A simple question. A question Adrian never asked until too late. Yes. I said. I'm healing. She smiled. I'm Leona. Want to find the lecture hall together. I looked at the path ahead. Wide. Bright. Unstolen. Sure. We walked through the gates. No Celeste blocking the stairs. No Adrian standing between truth and comfort. No headmaster calling violence a misunderstanding. No scholarship slipping away because someone richer wanted my seat. Only me. Nora Lynn. First rank. Right wrist fractured before finals. Still passed. Still entered. Still here. That night. In my dorm room. I opened a new notebook. My handwriting was slower than before. Less perfect. The letters leaned slightly when my wrist tired. I looked at the first page for a long moment. Then I wrote. A healed bone remembers the break. But it does not belong to the person who broke it. Outside. The campus bells rang. I placed my pen down and flexed my fingers. Open. Close. Stretch. Hold. Release. In my last life. Celeste snapped my wrist and everyone called it an accident. In this life. I let her do it under a camera that could not pity her. I did not send her to prison with revenge. She walked there herself. One cruel choice at a time. And I walked somewhere else. Into the lecture hall. Into the hospital. Into the future. My wrist still ached when it rained. Maybe it always would. But pain was no longer proof that I lost. It was proof that I survived the hand that tried to stop me. Tomorrow. Anatomy lab began. I would hold a scalpel for the first time. Maybe my grip would shake. Maybe I would need to adjust. Maybe healing would take longer than I wanted. But the seat would be mine. The name would be mine. The future would be mine. And this time, when the world asked what happened in the stairwell, I would not have to scream. The camera had already answered. I died on a Tuesday choking on my own blood while my fiancé kissed my best friend in the hospital hallway. When I opened my eyes, the monitor's frantic flatline was replaced by the slow rhythmic ticking of my high school gymnasium clock. I was 18 again. The ink on my final exam was still wet. The very exam I was about to sacrifice to save his ego. Instead, I picked up my pink eraser. And that's when their nightmare began. The transition from death to life is not a peaceful waking. It is a violent gasping rip through the fabric of time. 1 second. I was suffocating in a sterile ICU room at St. Jude's. The metallic tang of heart failure in my mouth. Listening to the muffled sounds of Nathaniel Reed whispering promises into Serena Fairchild's ear just beyond my door. The next second. I was inhaling the overwhelming scent of industrial floor wax and cheap graphite. I gripped the edges of the laminate desk. My knuckles turning bone white. My heart, which had just been failing, was now beating with a ferocious, terrifying vitality against my ribs. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting the sterile white lights of the hospital. But when I opened them, the afternoon sun was streaming through the high caged windows of the Crestview High Gymnasium. I was 18 years old. The year was 2016. A collective scratching of number 2 pencils filled the cavernous room. I looked down. Sitting on my desk was the final AP Calculus exam. More importantly, it was the qualifying exam for the Caldwell Merit Scholarship. A full ride endowment that was the singular ticket out of this suffocating town. Slowly I turned my head. 2 rows to my left, sitting with his trademark slouched arrogance, was Nathaniel. He wore the vintage denim jacket I had bought him for his birthday. His jawline was sharp. His golden brown hair perfectly tousled. He was the boy I had loved so fiercely that it had literally killed me. In my previous life, I spent a decade bending my spine so he could walk on my back. I wrote his college admissions essays. I funded his failing tech startup with my grandfather's inheritance. I ignored the late-night texts he received from Serena. I ignored the smell of her vanilla perfume on his collar. I died of a stress-induced cardiomyopathy at 28. Entirely depleted. While he and my supposed best friend waited for the monitor to flatline so they could finally stop hiding, a sharp rhythmic tapping broke my trance. Tap tap tap. It was Nathaniel's boot against the metal leg of his chair. The signal. In my past life, this was the defining moment of my ruin. We had a system. I was the undisputed valedictorian. Nathaniel was struggling to maintain a C average. He needed the Caldwell Scholarship to appease his demanding father, Arthur Reed. So I had spent the last 2 hours meticulously solving every complex derivative and integral, filling out my scantron to absolute perfection. According to our plan, I was supposed to write his name on my perfect test and he was going to write my name on his half-assed paper. We would bump into each other at Mr. Henderson's collection desk and swap papers. He would get the scholarship. I would take the failing grade, effectively destroying my chances at an Ivy League school. All because he had convinced me that we would build our future together. Cass. I stared at the bubbles on my scantron. Every single one was filled in with dark, heavy graphite. It was a masterpiece of academic labor. Tap. 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 He kicked his chair again harder, this time shooting an impatient glare in my direction. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Stripped of the naive adoration that had blinded me. For 10 years. He wasn't a tortured genius needing a break. He was a parasite. And sitting 3 rows behind him, gnawing on her pen and watching us with calculated nervous eyes, was Serena. In the past, she had consoled me after I failed, telling me how brave I was to sacrifice for love while simultaneously using my failure to secure her own spot in the top 10%. A cold, unfamiliar calm washed over me. It started in my fingertips and spread to my chest, freezing the remnants of the pathetic lovesick girl I used to be. I didn't reach for my pencil to write his name. Instead, I reached for my eraser. Nathaniel's eyes widened slightly as he watched me. The gymnasium was dead silent, save for the ticking clock and the rustle of paper. I pressed the heavy pink rubber to the top left corner of the scantron. With deliberate forceful strokes, I began to erase. I erased question 1. I erased question 2. Nathaniel stopped tapping. He shifted in his seat, leaning forward, his brow furrowing in confusion. I locked eyes with him across the aisle. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just kept my eyes completely dead. Completely hollow as my hand moved violently across the page. Gray smudges clouded the crisp white paper. The rubber shavings piled up like dust. By the time Mr. Henderson called out, 5 minutes. Everyone. I had annihilated 2 hours of flawless work. The scantron was a smeared blank canvas. The answers that were supposed to build his empire were gone. I stood up the chair, scraping loudly against the polished floor. Nathaniel's face was pale, his jaw slack. He looked from me to the ruined paper in my hand, his mind short-circuiting as the reality of his impending failure crashed into him. I walked to the front of the room, dropped the blank smudged paper onto the submission pile, and walked out of the double doors into the bright blinding sunlight of my second chance. The hallway outside the gymnasium was eerily quiet, filled only with the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the interstate. I leaned against the cool metal of the lockers, closing my eyes and simply breathing. The air tasted different. It didn't taste like the sterile antiseptic dread of the ICU. It tasted like freedom. For the first time in a decade, my chest didn't ache with the crushing weight of maintaining Nathaniel's fragile ego. I looked at my hands unscarred by the 4 needles. Unbitten nails. Steady and young. I had done it. I had pulled the first thread. And now I was going to watch their entire carefully constructed sweater unravel. The heavy gymnasium doors banged open, startling a flock of pigeons resting on the windowsill. Nathaniel stormed out. His face flushed a dark, furious red. He didn't have his backpack. He had clearly sprinted out the second. Mr. Henderson dismissed the room. Cassidy. He hissed his voice. A panicked, venomous whisper. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. Grabbing my elbow. What the hell was that? What did you do? I looked down at his hand. Gripping my arm. In my past life, that touch would have sent a thrill of devotion through me. Now it just felt greasy. Let go of me, Nate, I said, my voice eerily calm. It wasn't a request. He blinked, taken aback by the ice in my tone. But his panic overrode his surprise. His grip tightened. Are you psycho? We had a deal. You were supposed to put my name on that test. I watched you erase the whole damn thing. What am I supposed to do now? Henderson just took my paper. I guessed on everything. Cass. I didn't even read the questions because you told me you had it covered. I changed my mind. I said, simply stepping back and pulling my arm free. You changed your mind. He repeated, his voice cracking with rising hysteria. This is the Caldwell Scholarship. My dad is going to kill me. Do you understand what you just did? You just ruined my life. You'll survive, I replied, adjusting the strap of my bag. You're smart. Right. That's what you always tell everyone. You're a visionary. A visionary shouldn't need a girl to bubble in his scantron. Before he could unleash the string of curses forming on his lips, the gym doors opened again. Serena hurried out, clutching her meticulously organized binder to her chest. Her blonde hair bounced perfectly around her shoulders. She wore an expression of deep manufactured concern, her wide doe eyes darting between me and Nathaniel. Hey, is everything okay? She asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She stepped closer to Nathaniel almost instinctively, placing herself between us, a subtle territorial move I had never noticed in my previous life. Nate, you look really upset. Cass, what happened in there? You left so early. Cassidy lost her damn mind. That's what happened. Nathaniel spat, running a hand through his hair in distress. He looked at Serena silently, pleading for her to validate his anger. Serena turned to me, her eyes brimming with fake sympathy. Cass, did you panic? It's okay if the test was too hard. We all know how much pressure you put on yourself. I'm sure Mr. Henderson will let you retake it if you cry and tell him you had an anxiety attack. It was brilliant. Really. In one breath. She managed to insult my intelligence, paint me as emotionally unstable, and position herself as the rational, caring mediator. 10 years ago, I would have broken down in tears and agreed with her. I would have taken the blame, apologized to Nathaniel, and spent the rest of the semester doing their homework as penance. Instead, I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the metal lockers. Both of them flinched. I didn't panic. Serena, I said, leaning closer to her. I could smell the cheap vanilla body spray. It made my stomach turn. And the test wasn't hard. In fact, it was incredibly easy. I just realized I didn't care enough to submit it. But your GPA? Serena stammered, genuinely confused by my lack of hysterics. Your college applications. You needed this. I have options. I lied smoothly. I didn't, not yet. But I had 10 years of future knowledge locked in my brain. I knew which stocks were going to explode. I knew the outcomes of major sports events. And I knew exactly which properties in our town were about to be bought out by a major commercial developer. I didn't need a high school scholarship. I needed leverage. Options. Nathaniel scoffed, his anger masking a deep-seated terror. What options? You're nobody without this track, Cass. We were supposed to go to Stanford together. No. Nate. I corrected him, looking him dead in the eye. You were supposed to go to Stanford on my back. I'm just done carrying you. I turned on my heel and began walking down the hallway. Cassidy. Get back here. Nathaniel shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. We are not done talking about this. You owe me. I didn't look back. I didn't flinch. I just kept walking toward the exit, listening to the silence of my own footsteps. They were panicking. They should be, because removing myself as their academic crutch was only the beginning. Next, I was going to remove their social standing, their secrets, and their dignity. I let the heavy glass doors of the school close behind me, stepping out into the afternoon sun, ready to burn their world to the ground. The walk home from Crestview High felt like walking through a museum of my own foolishness. Every street corner, every diner, and every park bench held a ghost of my past servitude to Nathaniel. There was the curb where I sat in the freezing rain waiting for him to pick me up, only for him to text 3 hours later saying he fell asleep. There was the coffee shop where I spent my weekends typing his history term papers while he played video games with his friends. I unlocked the front door of my childhood home. The house was empty. My mother worked double shifts at the hospital to keep us afloat. A sacrifice I had entirely squandered in my previous life by giving my college fund to Nathaniel. I walked up the narrow stairs to my bedroom and dropped my backpack onto the floor. I booted up my clunky 2016 laptop. The dial-up tone of the cooling fan hummed as I logged into my pitifully small bank account. $842. The culmination of 2 years of weekend shifts at the local grocery store. In my past life, I used this money to buy Nathaniel a custom Fender guitar for graduation. This time, it was going to be the seed money for my empire. It was late May 2016. My mind sharp and unclouded by teenage hormones rifled through the archives of my 28-year-old memories. I needed rapid capital and I knew exactly how to get it. I grabbed a notebook and a pen, structuring my thoughts with cold mechanical precision. The Phase 1 objective checklist. Acquire capital. The 2016 NBA Finals were weeks away. The Golden State Warriors were going to take a 3-1 lead against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Everyone would write Cleveland off. The odds against them winning the championship would be astronomical. I knew Cleveland would pull off the greatest comeback in basketball history. I would drain my account, wait for the 3:1 deficit, and place every cent on Cleveland. Die. Secure leverage. Oliver Stanton. Clear's throat. He was the quiet, socially awkward kid who sat in the back of computer science class. In my previous life, Oliver developed a localized peer-to-peer data encryption app in his garage. In 2018, a Silicon Valley giant bought it for $4 million. Right now, Oliver needed exactly $2,000 to upgrade his servers to handle the beta testing. I would fund him in exchange for a 20% equity stake. Dismantle the facade. Nathaniel and Serena needed to fall. Not by my hands, but by their own hubris. I needed to isolate them, expose their lies, and let the public execution happen organically. I closed the notebook. The panic of dying was finally fully replaced by the intoxicating thrill of control. The next morning, the atmosphere at Crestview High was thicker than wet cement. The gossip mill had already churned through the events of the AP Calculus exam. As I walked down the main corridor, conversations abruptly ceased. Cameron, the school's premier gossip, who ran a highly trafficked anonymous blog, tracked my every movement from her locker, her eyes wide with predatory curiosity. I went to my locker and began swapping out my textbooks. I could sense her before I saw her. The sickeningly sweet cloud of cheap vanilla body mist announced Serena's arrival. Cassidy, she said softly, stepping up beside me. She looked impeccably distressed, wearing an oversized pastel sweater that made her look small and fragile. Serena, I replied, not looking up from my locker combination. Everyone is talking, she whispered, leaning in close so the eavesdroppers couldn't hear. Nate is an absolute wreck. He ignored my calls all night. He told his dad that Mr. Henderson lost his exam, but Arthur is demanding a meeting with the principal. Cass, you have to fix this. You have to go to Principal Davis and tell him you had a mental breakdown and accidentally erased your test and that Nate's test was mixed up. I slowly closed my locker door. The metallic click echoed sharply in the quieted hallway. I turned to face her. Why would I do that? Serena. Because he's your boyfriend. She pleaded, her doe, eyes shimmering with unshed, expertly manufactured tears. Because you love him. You guys are supposed to be endgame. You can't let his dad pull him from the soccer team over one stupid test. If you just take the blame, it'll blow over. My eyes drifted down to her wrist. There it was. A delicate silver charm bracelet with a small sapphire pendant. In my past life, Nathaniel told me he bought it for his younger sister's birthday, but the jewelry store wouldn't accept returns. I had thought it was a sweet, clumsy mistake. Now looking at it, gleaming on Serena's wrist, the audacity of their deception made me want to laugh. That's a beautiful bracelet. I noted my voice. dropping to a conversational murmur. Serena froze. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked translucent. Her hand instinctually darted down to cover her wrist, tucking the silver chain under the sleeve of her pastel sweater. My grandmother gave it to me," she stammered, her voice suddenly losing its theatrical confidence. "Really?" I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator watching a mouse trap itself in a corner because I saw the receipt for it in Nathaniel's glove box last week. Must be a wild coincidence. She stopped breathing. The terrified silence stretching between us was the most beautiful music I had heard since waking up in this timeline. "Tell Nate to fight his own battles," I whispered, stepping around her frozen form. "And tell your grandmother she has terrible taste in jewelry." By third period, the summons arrived. A pale student aide handed my AP English teacher a pink slip, her eyes darting nervously in my direction. "Cassidy Miller. Principal Davis's office." Immediately I calmly gathered my things, ignoring the synchronized turning of 30 heads. I had expected this. Nathaniel was a coward. But his father, Arthur Reed, was a bulldozer. Arthur was a prominent local real estate developer who practically funded the school's athletic department. He believed his money could rewrite reality. And for the last 18 years, it had. I pushed open the heavy oak door of the administrative office. The air conditioning was on full blast, but the tension in the room made it feel suffocatingly hot. Principal Davis sat behind his massive mahogany desk looking incredibly uncomfortable, dabbing his shining forehead with a handkerchief. Sitting in the leather guest chairs were Nathaniel and Arthur Reed. Arthur was a large man wearing a tailored navy suit that screamed new money. His face was a hardened older version of Nathaniel's handsome but cruel. Nathaniel sat slumped beside him, chewing on his thumbnail. His golden boy aura entirely evaporated. When I walked in, Nathaniel refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to stare intently at the pattern of the Persian rug. Cassidy. Please take a seat," Principal Davis said, gesturing to a hard wooden chair positioned directly in the center of the room. It felt like an interrogation. I sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight, folding my hands in my lap. "I don't have time for pleasantries, Davis," Arthur boomed, standing up and pacing behind his son's chair. He glared down at me. "Cassidy, I have known you for 4 years. You are a bright girl usually. But Nathaniel tells me there was a catastrophic error yesterday. He says his completed AP Calculus exam was somehow swapped or discarded and that you had some sort of hysterical episode." I let the silence hang for 3 seconds, ensuring the room was completely quiet before I spoke. "Is that what he told you, Mr. Reed?" I asked, my voice polite, even entirely devoid of fear. Arthur's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to 18-year-old girls speaking to him without a tremor of intimidation. "That is what happened. Mr. Henderson is claiming Nathaniel handed in a blank scantron. I find it highly unlikely that a prospective Stanford student would do such a thing. Nathaniel believes you panicked, erased your own test, and in the confusion, Henderson mixed the papers." "I see," I replied. I turned my gaze slowly to Nathaniel. "Nate, look at me." He flinched, his jaw tightening, but he kept his eyes glued to the floor. "Nathaniel," Arthur barked, embarrassed by his son's cowardice. "Look at the girl." Slowly, Nathaniel raised his head. The sheer naked panic in his eyes was staggering. He was silently begging me to fall on my sword. He was waiting for the girl who loved him so desperately she would happily destroy her own future to protect his fragile pride. "Did Mr. Henderson mix up the papers, Nate?" I asked, my tone conversational. "Or did you just not know how to find the derivative of a trigonometric function?" "Watch your tone, young lady," Arthur warned, taking a step toward me. I didn't break eye contact with Nathaniel. I unzipped my backpack and pulled out a crisp white folder. I had printed it in the school library an hour ago. I placed it on Principal Davis's desk. "What is this?" Principal Davis asked, hesitant to touch it. "That is a heavily documented history of Nathaniel's academic performance," I stated cleanly. "It includes copies of the 4 major English essays he submitted this semester side by side with essays I wrote for myself last year. You will notice the IP addresses on the Google Docs metadata match my home computer, not his. You will also find his actual practice test scores from our private study sessions, which place him firmly at a -average in calculus." The room went dead silent. Principal Davis opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. He went pale. You little liar. Arthur hissed, slamming his hand down on the desk, rattling the pen holder. You forged this to ruin him because what you guys had a lover's spat. I didn't forge the metadata. Mr. Reed. The IT department can verify it in 5 minutes. I said, finally looking up at the angry patriarch. Your son isn't a Stanford prospect. He is a fraud who has been using me as a ghostwriter for 2 years. Yesterday, I finally decided to stop doing his work. He handed in a blank scantron because he didn't know the answers. That is the truth. Dad. She's crazy. Nathaniel finally yelled, his voice cracking. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. She's just mad because I told her I wanted to take a break. A break. I laughed, shaking my head. Nate. You don't want a break. You just want more time to hook up with Serena in the back of your Jeep without having to delete your text messages. The color drained entirely from Nathaniel's face. He stumbled back a step, colliding with his father's arm. What did you just say? Arthur demanded, looking between me and his suddenly paralyzed son. I'm done here, I said, standing up and picking up my backpack. I looked at Principal Davis, who was staring at the folder as if it were a live bomb. I suggest you verify those documents. Principal Davis. If Caldwell University finds out the school knowingly nominated an academic fraud for their highest endowment, the fallout will be disastrous for the district. I walked toward the door, pausing just as my hand touched the brass handle. I glanced back at Nathaniel, whose entire life was currently crashing down around his ears. Oh. And Mr. Reed. I added, looking at Arthur. You should probably check his Jeep. The upholstery smells strongly of cheap vanilla. The heavy oak door of Principal Davis's office clicked shut behind me, sounding like a judge's gavel, sealing a guilty verdict. I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the muffled explosive shouting of Arthur Reed wash over me through the thick wood. He was tearing into Nathaniel with the kind of ruthless boardroom savagery that dismantled grown men, let alone a teenage boy whose entire personality was built on unearned praise. I smiled. It was a small, dangerous thing, but it was the first genuine smile I had worn since I woke up in this timeline. By the time I reached the cafeteria for lunch, the social ecosystem of Crestview High had entirely shifted. News in this school didn't travel. It detonated. Cameron's anonymous blog had already pushed a breaking news alert to everyone's phones. The headline was painfully accurate: Golden Boy tarnished, AP Calc scandal rocks the senior class. I took my usual seat at a table near the windows. Normally I would be flanked by Serena and a rotating cast of her shallow friends, while Nathaniel would periodically stroll by to steal my fries and soak up adoration. Today I sat alone and it was glorious. The cafeteria doors swung open with unnecessary force. Serena marched in. The pastel sweater fragility from this morning was completely gone. Her face was set in a hard venomous mask and her fists were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She spotted me, ignoring the whispers rippling through the room, and marched straight to my table. She slammed both hands down on the sticky laminate surface. What did you do? She hissed, her voice vibrating with barely contained hysteria. I casually speared a piece of lettuce with my plastic fork. I ate a salad. Serena. The ranch dressing is a little watery today, but otherwise I'm fine. Don't play games with me, Cassidy. She snapped, leaning in so close I could see the foundation caking around her nose. Nathaniel just texted me. His dad took his car keys. He's threatening to pull his college tuition. And Nate is trying to drag me down with him. He told his dad that I was distracting him, that I was the reason he couldn't study. You set us up. I set you up, I repeated, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. I looked at her with an expression of mild clinical fascination, as if observing a bug trapped in a jar. Serena. Did I force you to unbuckle his belt in the back of his Jeep? Did I force you to accept that cheap sapphire bracelet? Or did I just turn on the lights so everyone could see the roaches scatter? Her breath hitched. She looked around frantically, realizing that several students at the adjacent tables had gone dead silent, blatantly eavesdropping. You're a psycho, she whispered, her voice trembling. You're actually crazy. You ruined his life over a stupid high school crush. I took out the trash. I corrected her coldly. And you should be very careful, Serena. Right now, Arthur Reed thinks you're just a distraction. But if I decide to give Cameron the photo I have of you two sneaking out of the red roof in last month, you won't just be a distraction. You'll be the town pariah. Your mother is on the PTA board. Isn't she? How do you think she'll handle that kind of scandal? Serena's face drained of color. I didn't actually have a photo from the Red Roof Inn. But I remember Nathaniel bragging to his fraternity brothers about it years later. Her reaction confirmed it was true. She backed away from the table slowly, her eyes wide with a profound, primitive fear. She turned and practically ran out of the cafeteria. That afternoon, I skipped my final period. I had business to attend to. I walked to the First National Bank on Elm Street, withdrew my entire savings of $842, and proceeded directly to the public library. I logged onto a secluded computer in the back corner. The date was May 26, 2016. The NBA Finals were about to begin. In my past life, Nathaniel had lost $2,000 betting on the Golden State Warriors, screaming at the television when LeBron James pulled off the impossible. I knew the timeline perfectly. I set up an offshore sports betting account using a secure proxy. But I wasn't just going to bet on Cleveland to win. The odds wouldn't peak until Game 4 when Golden State took a 3-1 series lead. I needed to wait. In the meantime, I had my second phase to initiate. I found Oliver Stanton sitting by the reference section, typing furiously on a bulky laptop. He was a scrawny kid with unruly dark hair and a permanent scowl. He was brilliant, paranoid, and destined to be a millionaire in, clears throat, 2 years. Right now, he was just broke. I slid into the chair across from him. He didn't look up. I have a proposition for you, Oliver, I said quietly. I'm not fixing your cracked iPhone screen, Miller. He muttered, his fingers flying across the keys. I don't want you to fix my phone. I want to buy a 20% equity stake in CipherNet. His fingers froze mid-keystroke. For the first time, he looked up at me, his dark eyes wide with shock. He hadn't told anyone at school about his encryption app. He thought it was a total secret. How do you know about that? He asked, his voice a defensive whisper. I know a lot of things, I replied smoothly. I know you've hit a wall with your beta testing because your current servers can't handle the localized peer-to-peer data loads. I know you need exactly $2,000 to migrate to a secure AWS architecture. And I know the banks won't give a loan to an 18-year-old kid with no collateral. Oliver stared at me, his mind racing, trying to calculate how I had acquired this information. Who are you working for? Myself, I said, leaning forward. I will give you $2,500 on June 20th. Cash. No questions asked. No interference in your development process. In exchange, we draft a legally binding contract granting me 20% of CipherNet's future valuation and buyout revenue. You keep total creative control. June 20th. He asked, narrowing his eyes. Why then? Because my capital is currently tied up in a high-yield short-term investment. I lied flawlessly. Do we have a deal, Oliver? Or do you want to wait another year flipping burgers until your code becomes obsolete? Oliver looked at my outstretched hand. He looked at his screen, then back at me. Slowly, tentatively, he reached across the table and shook my hand. The second piece of my empire clicked into place. The final weeks of senior year were a master class in psychological destruction. I didn't have to lift a finger to ruin Nathaniel and Serena. I simply stopped protecting them from themselves. The Caldwell Merit Scholarship Committee officially disqualified Nathaniel after Principal Davis forwarded the plagiarism evidence. Arthur Reed, humiliated by the public rejection, essentially locked his son in a tower. Nathaniel was stripped of his car, his allowance, and his starting position on the soccer team. Serena, ever the survivalist, enacted a ruthless exit strategy. Recognizing that Nathaniel was now a sinking ship, she publicly dumped him in the middle of the senior quad. She played the victim flawlessly, crying tears of betrayal, claiming she had just discovered he was cheating on his tests and that she could never be with someone who lacked integrity. It was a breathtaking display of hypocrisy, but the school swallowed it whole. Suddenly, Nathaniel wasn't just a fraud. He was a toxic ex-boyfriend who had broken the heart of the school's sweetest girl. They began to cannibalize each other. Nathaniel, enraged by her betrayal, leaked a series of highly inappropriate text messages Serena had sent him. Serena retaliated by telling the principal that Nathaniel had paid a college student to take his SATs. It was a bloodbath, and I watched it all from the sidelines, completely untouched. Like a queen observing a gladiator match from the royal box. June arrived, bringing the suffocating heat of summer and the NBA Finals. The script played out exactly as my 28-year-old memory dictated. The Golden State Warriors surged to a 3-1 lead. The sports world declared the series over. Analysts laughed at the prospect of a Cleveland comeback. The offshore betting odds for a Cleveland championship skyrocketed to +100. If I parlayed the series outcome with LeBron James winning MVP, the multiplier was staggering. On June 11th, I locked myself in my bedroom, opened my laptop, and pushed all $842 of my savings into the digital void. It was a terrifying, exhilarating moment. I was entirely broke. But I wasn't gambling. I was time traveling. Game 5. Cleveland won. Game 6. Cleveland won. Then came June 19th. Game 7. The entire town was at the Crestview High graduation party hosted at a sprawling lake house owned by one of the wealthy lacrosse players. I attended not to celebrate my diploma, but because I wanted a front row seat to my victory. I sat alone on a wooden dock by the water, the glowing screen of my phone illuminating the dark. The final buzzer sounded. Cleveland had done it. They completed the 3:1 comeback. I refreshed my offshore betting account. My balance updated. 28,628. I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding for 10 years. The crushing, suffocating poverty that had defined my early 20s was gone. I had seed money. I had a future. I had Oliver Stanton's contract sitting in my bag, ready to be signed tomorrow. Footsteps thumped heavily against the wooden planks of the dock. I looked up. Nathaniel stood there. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. His golden brown hair was unwashed, and the arrogant spark in his eyes had been completely extinguished. He was holding a red plastic cup swaying slightly. The music from the party thumped in the distance, a sharp contrast to the absolute ruin radiating from him. Cass. He slurred, his voice thick with alcohol and desperation. He dropped to his knees on the dock, sitting a few feet away from me. I messed up. I messed up so bad. I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket, looking at him without an ounce of pity. You did, Nate. Serena is a monster, he whispered, a tear tracking down his cheek. She used me. The second my dad cut me off. She looked at me like I was garbage. She didn't love me. She just loved what I could do for her social standing. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I asked, my voice cutting through the humid night air like a scalpel. He flinched, looking down at his hands. I know. I used you, Cass. But I realize it now. I see it clearly. You were the only one who actually cared about me. You were the only one who had my back. Please talk to my dad. Tell him you made the plagiarism stuff up. Tell him you were just jealous. If you take it back, he might give me my car back. He might let me go to the local community college. I stared at the boy who had literally worked me to death in a past life. I stared at the man who had kissed my best friend while the heart monitor flatlined. He wasn't a tragic villain. He was just pathetic. Nathaniel, I said, my voice impossibly gentle, leaning closer to him. He looked up, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in his eyes. He thought the old Cassidy was still in there. He thought he could still manipulate the strings of my heart. I didn't erase that exam because I was jealous, I whispered, holding his gaze. I erased it because you are a parasite. You have never achieved a single thing in your miserable life without draining the blood of the people around you. I didn't ruin you. I just stopped bleeding for you. His face crumpled. The hope shattered, replaced by a hollow, vacant despair. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my dress. Have a nice life, Nate. Try not to drown. I walked off the dock, leaving him in the dark, and walked toward the blinding lights of the party. I had a check to write to a young programmer and an empire to build. The girl who died in that hospital room was gone forever. The woman who walked out of that lake house was untouchable. The diner on the corner of Elm Street smelled of stale coffee and industrial bleach, a scent I would forever associate with the genesis of my empire. It was June 20th, 2016. I slid into the cracked red vinyl booth across from Oliver Stanton. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His dark hair sticking up in chaotic angles. A half-eaten plate of cold fries pushed to the side. I didn't offer a greeting. I unzipped my canvas tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I dropped it onto the Formica table with a heavy, satisfying thud. Oliver stared at it. Is that $2? 500. Small bills non-sequential just in case your paranoia extends to the IRS. I said, my voice deadpan. Next to the envelope, I placed a 12-page legal document. I had paid a desperate local notary $50 to overlook my age by a few weeks and legitimize the paperwork. This is the equity contract. I get 20% of CipherNet. You get the AWS server migration and the freedom to build. Oliver wiped his hands on his jeans, visibly trembling as he reached for the contract. He read every single word. It took him 20 minutes. I sat perfectly still, sipping a lukewarm black coffee, watching the gears turn in his brilliant, chaotic mind. When he finally reached the last page, he picked up the cheap plastic pen the waitress had left behind and signed his name. You're making a bet on a ghost, Cassidy, he murmured, sliding the paperwork back to me. Nobody believes in this localized encryption concept. The big guys think it's redundant. The big guys are going to have a massive data breach in about 14 months. I replied, knowing full well about the Equifax hack that was destined to tear through the financial sector in 2017. When that happens, privacy won't be a luxury. It will be a mandate. Build the app. Oliver. Don't sell it until I tell you to. The next 2 years were a blur of calculated, relentless momentum. I didn't just leave my hometown. I escaped its gravitational pull entirely. With my sports betting capital, I aggressively day-traded tech stocks I knew were primed for explosive growth, multiplying my initial 28,000 into nearly $250,000 by the end of my freshman year at Columbia University. I didn't socialize. I didn't go to frat parties. I sat in the glow of dual monitors in my cramped Manhattan dorm room, watching the digital numbers in my brokerage account climb higher and higher. Then in October 2018, the phone call came. I was walking across the Columbia campus, the autumn air biting at my cheeks, when Oliver's number flashed on my screen. He never called. We communicated exclusively through encrypted emails. I answered immediately. Cisco. Oliver breathed. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. Cassidy Cisco Systems just made an offer. They want to acquire CipherNet's back-end architecture to integrate into their enterprise security suite. I stopped walking. The fallen leaves crunched under my boots. How much? Oliver. $4.8 million. He choked out. They want a complete buyout. We hand over the keys, sign NDAs and walk away. My heart hammered against my ribs. Not in panic, but in pure unadulterated triumph. 20% of $4.8 million. $960. 000. In a single afternoon at 20 years old, I had secured generational wealth. Take the deal, I commanded softly. Call their acquisition team and say yes. News of the CipherNet acquisition hit the lower tiers of the tech press by November. My name listed as a silent founding partner caught the attention of a few digital publications. I didn't think anyone back home read TechCrunch, but I vastly underestimated the desperate surveillance of the people I had left behind. It was a rainy Tuesday in December when the ghost of my past manifested in a high-end coffee shop near Columbus Circle. I was sitting at a corner table reviewing commercial real estate listings in my hometown when a voice sickly sweet and laced with artificial surprise cut through the ambient jazz. Cassidy. Oh my God. Is that really you? I looked up. Serena Fairchild stood there holding a ridiculously complicated iced latte. She was dressed in a knockoff designer trench coat. Her blonde hair perfectly styled. The past 2 years had aged her. The naive high school cheerleader facade had been replaced by the calculating exhaustion of a girl trying to survive in a city that didn't care about her small-town popularity. She had transferred to NYU. I recalled vaguely. Serena. I acknowledged, not closing my laptop. She practically threw herself into the chair opposite me, though I hadn't invited her to sit. I can't believe it. You look incredible. I saw the article online about that tech company. Cassidy. That is so amazing. I always knew you were going to do big things. I tell everyone back home how my best friend is a tech mogul now. I stared at her. The sheer audacity of her delusion was almost impressive. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, attempting to manufacture the intimacy we used to share. It's been so hard in the city. You know. She sighed, her eyes widening into their signature doe-like gaze. NYU is impossibly expensive. And my internship at Vogue pays nothing. I was actually thinking maybe we could get an apartment together. You know. Like the old days. Reconnect. The old days. I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. You mean the days when you were sleeping with Nathaniel in his Jeep while I wrote his college essays? Serena flinched, her carefully constructed smile shattering. Cass. Please. We were stupid teenagers. I've grown so much since then. I'm so sorry for what happened. Can't we just put it behind us? Sigh. Serena. I said, closing my laptop with a sharp snap. I am not a stepping stone. I am a wall and you are standing on the wrong side of it. Finish your overpriced coffee and go back to pretending you matter. If you ever approach me in public again, I will buy the building you live in and legally evict you. Her jaw dropped, her face flushing crimson. She stood up, her hands shaking, and practically ran out of the cafe, abandoning her latte on the table. I watched her retreat into the rain, feeling absolutely nothing. The parasites were still looking for hosts, but my blood was no longer on the menu. By the spring of 2020, the world was shifting, but my trajectory was entirely locked in. Using the capital from the Cisco buyout in my aggressive market shorts leading into the global economic downturn, I founded Vanguard Peak LLC, a private equity firm specializing in acquiring distressed commercial debt. I was 22 years old, operating with the cold mechanical precision of someone who had already lived a lifetime of regrets. I set my sights on my hometown. Specifically, I set my sights on Arthur Reed. Arthur's company, Reed Enterprises, was a dinosaur. He had built his wealth developing suburban strip malls in the late 90s, completely ignoring the rise of e-commerce. When the retail sector took a massive hit, his anchor tenants went bankrupt. To cover his bleeding margins, Arthur had taken out a predatory mezzanine loan against his crown jewel, the Crestview Plaza, a massive commercial center in the heart of our town. He owed $5 million to Wells Fargo, and he was 90 days delinquent. I didn't just buy the plaza, I bought the debt. Vanguard Peak LLC absorbed the loan for pennies on the dollar, making me the sole creditor of Reed Enterprises. Arthur Reed no longer answered to a faceless bank. He answered to me. I flew back to Crestview in early June. I didn't wear a vindictive smile or a flashy designer suit. I wore tailored charcoal trousers, a silk blouse, and the icy demeanor of an executioner. I had instructed my legal team to summon Arthur Reed to the downtown law offices of Sterling and Hayes to discuss the restructuring of his debt. I deliberately kept my name off the initial correspondence using only the Vanguard Peak letterhead. I sat at the head of a long mahogany conference table. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the town Arthur had ruled for decades. At precisely 10 a.m., the heavy glass doors opened. Arthur Reed walked in looking a decade older than I remembered. His tailored suits hung loosely on a frame that had withered under the stress of impending bankruptcy. And trailing 2 steps behind him, carrying a leather briefcase like a subservient intern, was Nathaniel. Nathaniel's golden boy aura had entirely rotted away. He had dropped out of community college after his sophomore year. His face was puffy, his posture slouched with the crushing weight of chronic failure. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had never possessed an original thought in his life. Stripped of the women who used to do his thinking for him, they didn't look up from their documents as they took their seats at the opposite end of the vast table. "Good morning," I said. My voice echoed across the polished wood. Nathaniel's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto mine. And for a terrifying second, I watched his brain fail to process the reality in front of him. The blood drained from his face so rapidly I thought he might pass out. "Cassidy," Nathaniel whispered, the name tearing out of his throat like a dry heave. Arthur froze, his hands hovering over his open briefcase. He looked up, squinting across the length of the table. When his eyes finally registered my face, his jaw slackened. The arrogant patriarch who had screamed at me in Principal Davis's office 4 years ago vanished, replaced by a terrified, confused old man. "What is the meaning of this?" Arthur demanded, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. He looked around the empty room, expecting a hidden camera or a senior partner, clear his throat, to step out. "Where is the representative from Vanguard Peak?" "You're looking at her, Mr. Reed," I said, folding my hands neatly on the table. "I am the founder and sole managing director of Vanguard Peak LLC. And as of last Thursday, I am the owner of the $5 million debt you defaulted on." "That's impossible," Arthur gasped, collapsing back into his leather chair. He clutched his chest, his breathing turning shallow. "You're a child. You're Cassidy Miller." I was Cassidy Miller. I corrected him smoothly. Now I am your creditor and I have reviewed your proposed restructuring plan for Crestview Plaza. I picked up the thick binder his lawyers had sent over, a desperate plea for a 3-year extension on the loan. I held it up, making sure they both saw it. And then I casually dropped it into the stainless steel trash can beside my chair. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot. The restructuring is denied, I stated cleanly. Cass. Please. Nathaniel suddenly stood up, his hands planted on the table, leaning forward with an expression of pure agony. You can't do this. This is my dad's entire legacy. It's our house. It's everything. We'll lose it all. Sit down, Nathaniel, I ordered. The authority in my voice was absolute. He immediately sank back into his chair, looking like a scolded child. I turned my attention back to his trembling father. 4 years ago, Mr. Reed, you sat in an office and called me a liar. You tried to use your wealth to destroy my academic future, to protect your son's fragile ego, I said, my tone eerily calm. I told you then that your son was a fraud. You didn't listen. You doubled down on a bad investment. That's a fatal mistake in business. I'll sue you, Arthur wheezed. Panic. Seizing his chest. I'll tie this up in litigation for a decade. You can't just seize my property out of spite. It's not spite, Arthur. It's a foreclosure. I smiled, sliding a single sheet of paper down the length of the table. It came to rest right in front of him. I am calling the loan due immediately. You have 14 days to produce $5 million in cash or Vanguard Peak. We'll seize Crestview Plaza, liquidate the assets, and garnish your remaining corporate accounts. Nathaniel buried his face in his hands, a pathetic muffled sob escaping his lips. He was 22 years old, crying in a boardroom because the girl he had tried to throw away was now holding the deed to his life. Arthur stared at the foreclosure, noticed his hands shaking violently. The realization was absolute. There was no loophole. There was no daddy's money to save them because I own the money. You've destroyed us, Arthur whispered, a tear leaking from his eye. No, I replied, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. I just stopped shielding you from the consequences of your own actions. You destroyed yourselves. I just bought the ashes. October 2020 brought a biting, unseasonably cold wind to Crestview. I stood in the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Crestview Plaza. The collar of my wool coat turned up against the chill. Above me, a massive crane idled its mechanical arm, hovering over the faded monolithic sign that read, Reed Enterprises. I wasn't alone. Standing beside me was David Aries, a senior partner at Gensler, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the world. We were finalizing the demolition blueprints. Vanguard Peak wasn't just going to sell the land. We were tearing down Arthur Reed's crumbling retail monument to build a state-of-the-art commercial tech incubator where a bankrupt sporting goods store currently sat. A localized server farm was going to rise. We can have the main structure leveled by Tuesday, Miss Miller, David said, pointing a gloved finger at the central atrium. The permits cleared this morning. The property is officially yours. Free and clear. Thank you, David. Tell the crew to start with the main sign. I replied, my breath pluming in the cold air. As David walked back to the construction trailer, the crunching of tires on loose gravel drew my attention. A battered 10-year-old Honda Civic pulled into the loading zone. It was a jarring sight against the backdrop of my sleek black town car and the heavy construction machinery. The driver's door opened and Arthur Reed stepped out. He looked fragile, wearing an oversized windbreaker instead of his tailored suits. But it was the passenger door's opening that delivered the final, most exquisite twist of my entire second life. Nathaniel climbed out of the back seat, wearing a faded uniform for a local hardware store, his posture stooped and defeated. And emerging from the front passenger seat, clutching a cheap synthetic handbag and wearing an expression of absolute horrified disbelief, was Serena. I watched them approach, piecing the puzzle together in real time. In my past life, Arthur Reed had a brief, scandalous affair with a much younger woman that ended in a quiet, expensive divorce. I had never known the woman's identity because I had been too busy managing Nathaniel's life to care about his father's. But looking at Serena, who was wearing a thin gold wedding band on her left hand, standing protectively yet resentfully next to the ruined patriarch, the terrifying, hilarious truth clicked into place. Serena, desperate for wealth and entirely devoid of a moral compass, after washing out of NYU, had seduced her high school boyfriend's wealthy father. She had married Arthur Reed, trading her youth for a fortune she thought was bulletproof. She had positioned herself as Nathaniel's stepmother, securing the ultimate financial safety net. Only she didn't realize the net had already been cut. By me. Oh. Cassidy. Arthur rasped, stopping a few feet away. The fight was entirely gone from his voice. The bank froze my personal accounts this morning. Everything is gone. My pension. The house equity. Everything. Serena stepped forward, her face a mask of panicked rage. The realization of what had happened was actively short-circuiting her brain. You did this on purpose. She shrieked, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. You waited. You waited until we were legally married to call the loan. You knew his assets would be seized. And you knew I'd be tied to his debt. I don't track your romantic endeavors, dear. I said, my voice as cold and flat as the concrete beneath our feet. I read balance sheets. It isn't my fault you decided to marry a liability. You thought you were marrying a millionaire. But you just married a $5 million deficit. You're a monster. Serena screamed, tears of genuine agonizing regret streaming down her face. She looked at Arthur with absolute disgust, realizing she had sold her soul to a man who was now legally destitute. I'm 22 years old. I can't be bankrupt. I won't do it. Then you should have hired a better divorce lawyer before the accounts were frozen. I replied mildly. Nathaniel stepped forward, placing a hand on Serena's arm. Serena. Stop. Everyone is looking. Don't touch me. She snapped violently, shoving Nathaniel backward. This is your fault. If you hadn't been so stupid in high school, if you had just passed that test, none of this would have happened. I'm stuck with both of you losers. Nathaniel stumbled, looking between his father, his ex-girlfriend turned stepmother, and the fading sign of his family's empire. The golden boy was entirely gone. He was just a shell of a man watching the two people who had enabled his worst instincts tear each other apart in a parking lot. He looked at me, a silent, pathetic plea in his eyes, begging for a mercy he hadn't earned. I didn't give it to him. I didn't feel anger or vindictiveness or even pity. Looking at them, a broken old man, a parasitic gold digger trapped in her own snare, and a fraud who had finally met reality, I felt entirely beautifully empty. They were no longer the architects of my misery. They were just strangers standing on my property. The demolition starts in 5 minutes, I said, turning my back to them. I suggest you move your car before it gets towed. It's a private lot now. I didn't wait for their response. I walked back toward my car, the heavy mechanical groan of the crane roaring to life behind me. A few seconds later, a massive crash echoed through the air, followed by the sound of shattering glass and twisting metal. The Reed Enterprises sign hit the pavement, shattering into 1,000 irrecoverable pieces. I slid into the plush leather seat of my town car and closed the door, shutting out the noise, the cold, and the ghosts of my past. I took a deep breath of the quiet air. I was 22 years old. I was entirely free and my life was finally mine to live. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop holding the pen for someone else's story and let them write their own ruin. I gave them enough rope and they built their own cage. If my story taught you anything, let it be this. Never set yourself on fire just to keep a parasite warm. Protect your peace. Build your empire and let karma handle the rest. If you love this story of ultimate revenge and rebirth, please smash that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their worth and subscribe for more insane real-life drama. What would you have done in my shoes? Drop a comment below.